Supplements too young. So obviously, let's look at the word supplement. The supplement is to supplement the primary. So my first question is, how's the kid eating? Like I wouldn't even get into a conversation of supplements with even an adult unless we'd figured out the primary. Like, what does your food look like? Are you eating enough protein? Where are your carbs coming from? What kind of fats are you, consuming? Those feel like lower hanging fruit. And are you tracking your macros? Are you being intelligent and rotating and mixing different protein sources, but different carb sources? And from there, if you wanted to supplement, and I recommend this for all of our clients and the people that reach out to me, instead of randomly just taking supplements, you need to get some micronutrient testing done and figure out where you're deficient. We've been dealing with some stuff with my little boy and, just got him a bunch of testing and found that there was no traceable chromium in his system. What is chromium? It's a mineral. So it helps glucose enter the cell and helps your body efficiently use insulin. So now he's got a supplement with some chromium and we got to figure out some supplement. But the only reason that we know this is because we've done some micronutrient testing and kind of looking for some other issues. So I'm not overly excited for you to be pumping a 10-year-old full of branched chain aminos, which if you go read the research, is pretty conclusive that if you're eating a high protein diet, branched chain amino acids are pretty much useless. So if he's eating like 5 grams of protein a day, then they might be a benefit. But if the kid's eating a high protein diet, which I recommend for most kids to eat a high protein diet, moderate fat and, moderate carb, on that situation. So if creatine you wanted to add, that's another interesting one. I really think every vertebrate on the planet should be consuming creatine. And actually Rob Exline and I had a really good chat. He did a pretty decent write-up, which I was on the process of writing an article on creatine. And then we collabed and talked and I was like, okay, hey, here's my information. Just you write it. And there's some pretty fascinating stuff with creatine content in meat that is cooked versus dried.
So dried like jerky?
Yeah, dried has a higher creatine content.
Interesting.
And the contention, and I read this somewhere and I'd never read it anywhere else, and it wasn't in a scientific research paper or anything of reputable. I think actually the guy that said it was kind of a bullshitter, but he made an interesting point that creatine content is higher in fast animals like deer and wild animals, things that can run fast, than it is in grazing slower animals like cows that stand around. And I'd never read that. Asked Rob to do a little research and he came back and was like, hey, I couldn't find anything to support that, but there's some really interesting information about cooking meat versus drying meat. Whereas if you think about, before the advent of refrigeration, either you cooked the meat and ate it or you dried it for later. So it might be an interesting indication of maybe ramping up creatine. But I started taking creatine when I was 14 years old and had pretty much taken 5 to 10 grams or, 5 to 10, 2 teaspoons, which I think is 10 grams. Of creatine every day since I was 14 years old. And so what's that, 30 years? So would I be too excited to dump a bunch of creatine on your 10-year-old? No. Is it going to hurt him? No, but I think it's got some really interesting stuff in terms of ATP and, brain protectants. And I think we're going to look, and I think the research is already coming out, that if you want to starve off all these different, age-related diseases that are hitting people, I think creatine's a great place for it.
And is there an age recommendation for that? Would it be like the high school when they start lifting weights, or does weights have anything to do with it?
Yeah. Obviously I think, taking creatine and lifting weights is a benefit. So, I really wouldn't start messing with that stuff until I'm 14 years old. And I think at that point, things like, I had somebody hit me up and ask about vitamin D supplementation for kids. And I was like, how much outside time are they getting? Like, there's some really fascinating stuff. There's a pretty interesting research article I just read that Jim Laird forwarded me that talked about morning sunshine and actually going and putting your feet on grass and sitting outside with direct sunlight as a way to help set circadian rhythms relating to gut health and insulin sensitivity and all these things, which, in the realm of science seems kind of hokey, oh, really direct sunlight? And you're like, it kind of makes sense.
Well,
and
I can't recall the podcast, but someone spoke to the value of vitamin D and then not wearing sunglasses, meaning it's filtered through the eyes to then.
That's why I stopped wearing sunglasses a lot. I only wear them when I drive, but I tend to not wear them outside anymore for that reason.
Well, I do it when I coach, so I can have dramatic effect in the huddle speaking to the guys.
Do you wear a whistle?
Oh, not during games. During practices, 100% on the whistle. That is, I mean, how we manage and breaking up the practices, because we have multiple coaches there, assigning a manager for a drill, and then having a coach, because we ran into people, it was overcoaching 100%, and then you're like, the next kid doesn't get to go in the drill.
Gotcha.
So split it up that way, but yes to the whistle, because somebody needs to manage the experience and keep these kids more opportunities than or words at the level I'm at.
So the other one I would check for kids is sodium content. So, I mean, obviously we put a ton of element in all of our kids' stuff, and I think that's great, especially for performance. I mean, you know, as I go back and I think about some of the recommendations that were made when I was a kid, you remember like, oh, you know, like you don't want
remember,
like you don't want to eat fat because, you know, fat will make you fat, and you don't want to have sodium because that'll bloat you. I mean, it was just like, we couldn't have been more fucking wrong in a lot of these recommendations.
The Snackwells generation.
Well, don't you remember too if you eat too much red meat, it's going to, you know, raise your cholesterol, which is going to, increase your saturated fat and give you heart disease. Mm-hmm. Like, so many of these things were just fucking conjecture and absolute bullshit that we know that it's fucking dead wrong. We could not be more wrong. And I think all it's done is drive us into managed healthcare and fucking living a life that's tied to pharmacology.
Going back, I'm a loaded freight train and I'm right on track.